Welcome to the Deep Dive. We dig through the noise to bring you the stories and insights that really matter.
And today we are tackling, well, probably the most legendary rivalry in modern tech history.
Oh, absolutely. Gates versus Jobs. Bill Gates and Steve Jobs. These weren't just CEOs, they were almost like opposing forces shaping the entire personal computer revolution.
Totally. And their conflict, it wasn't just about market share, was it? It really dug into fundamental questions about what technology should be, how it should work, how it should feel.
Exactly. So our mission today is to really get into that. A head-to-head look at these two giants. We'll contrast their core ideas, their, battle plans, and ultimately what they left behind.
Yeah, you've got Gates on one side, the pragmatist, right? Super sharp business mind, laser focused on licensing, getting Microsoft software absolutely everywhere. Efficiency was his game.
And then you have Jobs, the artist, the perfectionist, insisting on total control, hardware and software tightly bound together. That end-to-end experience was everything to him.
So the debate we're framing isn't just like who had the better machine in 84 or 85. It's bigger. It's this ongoing tension. Open versus closed systems.
Accessible, maybe a bit messy, focused on compatibility, that's the Bates way, versus the curated, seamless, beautiful experience,
Yeah.
the Jobs philosophy.
And this clash, I mean, yes, there was personal animosity, definitely, but it was fundamentally about these competing visions for the future of technology. A future, frankly, that you and I are living in right now.
Right, so let's dive in. Let's start at the beginning with their formative years.
Okay, so Bill Gates, when you look back, the descriptions are fascinating. He wasn't your typical corporate leader image, was he?
Not at all. Sources describe him as having this boyish charm, almost like a former hacker kid who stumbled into running a company. Engaging, sure, but maybe easy to underestimate.
But anyone who did underestimate him learned pretty quickly. He was absolutely formidable, had this incredible clarity about what he wanted.
Which was?
Just one thing, really. Stunningly simple. Microsoft software. On every single desktop PC in the world. That was the vision.
And the origins are kind of amazing, almost accidental feeling. It goes back to Lakeside School in Seattle.
Yeah, this private school where Gates and a few other kids got hooked on computers. Gates himself called it an expensive addiction.
An addiction the school couldn't actually afford to support initially, right?
Exactly. So, get this. The Lakeside Mothers Club holds a rummage sale. They raise about $3,000.
Wow. A rummage sale.
A rummage sale, specifically to buy these kids computer time on a teletype machine connected to a mainframe somewhere. They had no idea what they were unleashing.
He called that teletype his umbilical cord. To this whole new world of logic, code, problem solving, it just clicked for him.
And that early access, that addiction, led pretty directly to some of his, well, legendary early work, like the Altair Basic story.
Oh yeah, the classic tale. Chairman Bill flying down to Albuquerque.
Checks into the Hilton, supposedly with just a stack of yellow legal pads, no computer.
Sits there for 5 days and handwrites the code for Disk Basic, then spends another 5 days at MI debugging it. It sounds almost mythical.
It is mythical. It's part of the Microsoft origin story. But it's important to add some nuance here, based on our sources.
Okay.
While that story definitely highlights Gates' drive, some people who were there, like Ed Curry, felt that Paul Allen, his co-founder, maybe deserved, as much or even more credit for the actual technical heavy lifting on that basic.
Right. History often simplifies things around one figurehead, but regardless of who wrote every line of code.
The strategy that followed was pure Gates. That Disk Basic wasn't just code. It became the first big licensing win for Microsoft. It established their business model right there. Ubiquity through licensing.
And that model reached its absolute peak, you could argue, around 1980 with the IBM deal. This is huge.
Monumental. IBM, the giant, wants to get into PCs. They need an operating system. Gates offers them MS-DOS.
But crucially, he doesn't sell it outright.
No, that's the masterstroke. He licenses it. And crucially, he keeps the rights to license it to other companies too, non-exclusively.
And IBM, maybe a bit arrogant, focused on their hardware dominance. They just didn't see the implications.
They didn't grasp what that non-exclusive clause would unleash. For Gates, it meant a steady income, sure. But much, much more importantly, it cemented MS-DOS as the standard.
If you wanted to build a computer that ran the same software as the IBM PC, you needed MS-DOS.
Which led directly to the PC clone market. Suddenly, dozens, then hundreds of companies could build IBM-compatible machines, often cheaper.
Driving prices down, pushing PCs everywhere, and every single one of those clones
needed Microsoft software. Gates essentially weaponized fragmentation to achieve market dominance. He didn't care if the hardware guys fought it out as long as they all ran his OS.
Our sources mention he was fiercely competitive even then. Right after the IBM deal, apparently slammed his fist and swore he'd put competitors out of business.
He was focused on controlling the platform, the underlying infrastructure. That was his path to winning. Ruthlessly efficient.
Okay, now let's completely shift gears. Let's talk about the other side of this coin, Steve Jobs.
If Gates was about the platform and the business strategy, Jobs was about, well, something else entirely. Philosophy, aesthetics, control.
His core belief, almost a religion for him, was that a truly great computer needed its hardware and software developed together, in lockstep, tightly integrated.
End-to-end control. That's the phrase. And it's the absolute polar opposite of Gates's licensing free-for-all.
Jobs genuinely seemed to believe that if you let outsiders or even, frankly, different internal teams mess with the vision, the whole thing fell apart. It became compromised, clunky, ugly.
And you saw this play out inside Apple itself, which, ironically, as a company, often lacked overall management cohesion, even while Jobs demanded total product cohesion.
Right, look at the early product line. The Macintosh was intentionally incompatible with the Lisa, which was Apple's earlier attempt at a graphical machine.
And neither of those was compatible with the Apple II, which was still paying all the bills. It made no sense from a standard business perspective.
But it made perfect sense if you accepted Jobs' premise. Each product had to be its own perfect, self-contained universe. No compromises, even for compatibility with your own stuff.
And that obsession with control extended way beyond the engineering. It went right into marketing, into perception. He was a master showman.
He learned from Regis McKenna, the PR guru, how to turn a product launch into an event. High drama, exclusivity, carefully managed reveals.
Oh yeah, the story about the Lisa launch at the Carlisle Hotel in New York says it all.
He didn't just book a conference room, select reporters from, quote, anointed publications.
Right, they were ushered in one by one into his suite. And there's the Lisa on a table, but surrounded by these dramatic, expensive cut flowers.
Total stagecraft. He wasn't just showing a computer, he was presenting an experience. Controlling the narrative, down to the flower arrangements, just like he controlled the pixels on the screen.
So while Gates is laying down the railroad tracks for the entire industry,
Jobs is upstairs at the Carlisle, crafting poetry, and he believed only his poem was worth reading.
and that fundamental difference, the railroad builder versus the poet, inevitably led to conflict, especially around the Lisa and the Mac in the early 80s.
Okay, so remind us of the timing. The Lisa came out first, right?
In January 1983, expensive, aimed at business, a full year before the Macintosh was ready.
And Jobs, even though he'd been kicked off the Lisa team earlier, he was still chairman. And he took charge of the publicity for the Lisa.
He did. Even though he'd apparently lost a $5,000 bet against the Lisa being a success, he was still the face for its launch.
That sounds complicated.
It was. And the official plan was clear. Talk only about the Lisa. Don't mention the Mac, because that would just cannibalize sales of this already very pricey machine.
But Jobs being Jobs.
He couldn't stick to the script. His passion was the Mac. So, in major interviews for Fortune, for Business Week, while supposedly promoting the Lisa,
He starts talking about the Mac.
oh yeah, calls it the most incredible computer in the world, and then drops the bomb. Admits right there that the Mac and Lisa will be totally incompatible.
Wow. He basically torpedoed the Lisa during its own launch window.
Pretty much gave it the kiss of death, as our sources put it. It's a classic case of conflicting roles. Jobs, the chairman, should have backed the Lisa. But Jobs, the visionary, was already focused on his next creation, the Mac, and he just couldn't hide it. Corporate strategy be damned.
So he's kind of fighting himself, or at least Apple is fighting itself. Meanwhile, the real war is starting to brew between Apple and Microsoft.
Exactly. Over the GUI, the graphical user interface, Apple had poured resources into developing that user-friendly point-and-click system, heavily inspired by that famous visit to Xerox PR.
And Microsoft at this point was actually a partner, right? They were making software for the Mac, things like Excel.
They were key developers, which is why Jobs went ballistic, absolutely furious when he found out Microsoft was secretly developing its own graphical interface, Windows.
Just as their non-compete agreement related to GUI development was about to expire.
Yeah, Apple felt betrayed. They felt they'd shown Microsoft the future, shared secrets, and now Gates was turning around to compete using those very ideas.
This leads to the confrontation. The famous showdown in Cupertino.
Jobs basically summoned Gates, told him to come down for a command performance, like Gates was reporting to him.
You can just imagine the tension. Gates flies down, walks into the room alone to face Jobs and his whole team, who are presumably Furious.
And according to Gates's recollection, he just looked at Jobs amidst all the anger and basically said, "Look, Steve, we're doing Windows. Cool as you like."
Just laid it out there.
He apparently told Jobs, "We're betting our company on graphical interfaces." He didn't even really deny the similarities. He just framed it as, this is where the industry is going, and we're going there too.
It was a strategic masterclass in neutralizing moral outrage with market inevitability.
And, well, we know how that bet paid off for Microsoft. Windows became utterly dominant through the 90s and beyond.
Exponentially. But that dominance came at a cost. Certainly in terms of industry goodwill. There was a lot of resentment towards Microsoft.
Competitors genuinely feared Gates. They saw Microsoft's tactics as predatory, designed to crush any opposition. It got pretty bad. Our sources mention an incident at a software awards dinner where Microsoft actually got booed by the audience when they won an award. That tells you something about the mood.
And that bitterness wasn't just whispers. It led to formal action. The FTC investigation into Microsoft's practices.
It didn't even start with the FTC deciding to look into them. It started because someone in the industry filed a detailed complaint, basically saying Microsoft was strangling competition.
So Gates' reputation for being formidable, even ruthless, was well earned. You didn't make a move without thinking about how Redmond would react.
And his competitive fire wasn't just aimed outwards. He could turn it on partners, too, if he felt they were getting in the way of that core vision. Software everywhere.
Like the incident with IBM over the 286 chip.
Right. Early 1986 at Microsoft internal retreat. Gates apparently goes on this tirade just ranting that IBM's strategy for their new 286 chip architecture was, quote, fucked up.
Strong words about your biggest partner. Why was he so mad about a chip?
Because IBM was starting to build proprietary elements into that chip architecture, things that weren't open. And Gates saw that as a direct threat.
Because it could break the open standard, the standard that allowed MS-DOS and Windows to run on all the clones.
Exactly. Anything proprietary threatened the ecosystem that Microsoft depended on. Any move towards a closed system, even by IBM, was an attack on his platform dominance. It had to be open for him to win.
Which is such a profound contrast when you flip back to Jobs. His focus wasn't on controlling the ecosystem through openness, but controlling the experience through relentless simplification.
Jobs had this almost uncanny ability to just filter out the noise. Legal problems, business pressures, family stuff, even later, his own health issues. He could shut it all out to focus purely on the product, and specifically on making it simpler.
That focus was critical when he returned to Apple in the late 90s, wasn't it? The company was floundering.
Totally. And what did he do? He didn't add more products. He took an axe to the existing lineup, just cut down to a few core offerings. His process was subtractive.
Removing buttons, removing features, removing complexity. He believed choice was a burden if not presented perfectly.
And that drive for simplicity, combined with the end-to-end control, led to that legendary design focus. The details mattered intensely, like with the iPhone and iPad design process with Jony Ive.
The guiding principle, they said, was deference to the display. Get everything else out of the way.
How do we make the physical object just disappear so you're only interacting with the content? That meant minimizing buttons, bezels, everything, which you can only really do if you control the whole stack, hardware and software.
And the level of detail they obsessed over is just wild. There's that story about the shape of the bottom edge.
Right. Jobs looks at an early model, says it doesn't feel casual enough. He wants you to feel like you can just scoop it up impulsively.
So I figures out the solution is to slightly round the bottom edge, just a tiny curve.
Not enough that you'd consciously notice it, but enough that your hand feels invited to just slide under it and pick it up naturally, rather than deliberately lifting it off a flat surface.
Think about the engineering that requires. Designing ports and buttons into this subtle curve that almost vanishes underneath.
That's the difference, right? Gates provides the functional components, licensed out. Jobs engineers a holistic feeling, where the curve of the plastic is part of the user interface philosophy.
Meanwhile, back in Redmond, Microsoft is dealing with the opposite problem. Not too few products, but maybe too much success. Explosive growth.
Which sounds great, but it caused huge internal strains. Our sources talk about this feeling that big is not beautiful among the smart, creative people there. They missed the startup feel.
And managing that scale became a real challenge, especially when trying to enter new markets where they didn't automatically own the platform.
Yeah, like the consumer retail market. Vern Rayburn, who ran their consumer products division, really struggled. Microsoft knew how to sell operating systems to computer makers, OEMs. That was their world.
Big, impersonal B2B deals.
Exactly. They were complete novices in the fast-paced, brand-conscious, design-sensitive world of selling directly to consumers. The world where, frankly, Jobs was king.
So, Microsoft is wrestling with the complexities of scale, while Jobs is laser-focused on achieving simplicity through control. Two completely different worlds.
And these different approaches extended to how they handled conflict. Gates waged war through strategy, through licensing, through market maneuvers. It was business.
Whereas Jobs, his conflicts were often deeply personal, emotional, public even.
The relationship with John Scully is the prime example. The Pepsi CEO Jobs famously wooed to Apple.
With that legendary line, do you want to sell sugar water for the rest of your life, or do you want to come with me and change the world? Classic Jobsian pitch.
And initially, they were incredibly close. Jobs could be intensely effusive when he admired someone. On Scully's first anniversary at Apple, Jobs threw a dinner party.
Gave this glowing toast, apparently calling the day Scully joined one of the two happiest days of his life. Said he'd learned so much from him, it sounds almost like a romance.
It had that intensity. But like many intense relationships, it soured dramatically. By May 1985, the company was struggling, and Jobs decided Scully was the problem. He felt Scully had lost his stride.
So Jobs being Jobs, he didn't, scheme behind the scenes. He confronted him directly.
Walked into Scully's office and basically told him he thought he should resign. Just like that.
Wow. How did Scully react?
Scully, who was usually pretty calm, apparently just blew up. He started listing Jobs' failures, the unstable Mac software, the inability to ship new models reliably, the pricing issues driving customers away.
So it turned into an argument.
A massive shouting match, according to accounts, just yelling at each other about who was the worst manager, who was ruining Apple. It got incredibly heated.
And the end.
Jobs eventually just stormed out, and Scully, whose office had this big glass wall looking out, apparently turned away from the window and just wept, broke down completely.
That's incredibly raw. And so public, almost. It really shows that personal, volatile side of Jobs. The conflict wasn't just business. It was deeply emotional, leaving real scars.
And that emotional intensity wasn't just for business. Friends described him as being just as dramatic in his personal life, falling deeply in love, sharing every high and low. That passion infused everything.
Even towards the end of his life, that intensity remained focused back on Apple. Tim Cook talked about visiting him when he was very ill.
Yeah, Cook said Jobs would visibly brighten whenever the conversation turned to new Apple products. It was like his life force was connected to the company.
And the level of detail he still cared about. Cook mentioned spending an hour discussing the upcoming iPhone 3GS.
Not the strategy, not the marketing plan. They spent an hour debating the lettering on the back. Should the GS be capitalized? Yes. Should it be italicized? Absolutely not.
That deep, almost spiritual connection to the smallest details of the product, unwavering even then.
Now contrast that kind of personal dynamic with Gates. His competitive drive wasn't typically expressed through emotional showdowns. It was colder, more strategic.
He had this ability, almost like a superpower, to absorb his opponents, to co-opt them.
Yeah, there's a great analogy our sources use, comparing him to John D. Rockefeller, the oil tycoon.
Rockefeller had this lawyer, Virgil Klein, who kept beating Standard Oil in court for a rival company.
So what does Rockefeller do? He doesn't try to crush Klein. He calls him into his office and basically says, "You beat us fair and square, now come work for me." And Klein did.
And Gates operated similarly.
Very much so. He was known for tracking competitors, seeing who was effective against Microsoft, and then hiring them. If you were good enough to cause him problems, you were good enough to bring inside the empire.
It's a pattern, right? Neutralize the threat through business means licensing, market share, and if the talent is undeniable, absorb it. Much less personal drama than the Scully situation.
Absolutely. Gates fought ecosystem battles. Jobs fought aesthetic and personal battles. Very different styles of conflict. Hashtag outro.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, the legacies really stand out in sharp contrast, don't they?
They really do. Bill Gates fundamentally defined the PC era through software standards.
Yeah.
MS-DOS, then Windows. His genius was business strategy, licensing, and frankly, ruthless execution to ensure Microsoft software was simply unavoidable.
He built the infrastructure. Even if it wasn't always the prettiest, it was everywhere. He won the ubiquity war.
Whereas Jobs, his legacy is defined by that insistence on the integrated, curated experience, end-to-end control delivering seamlessness and beauty. He might have lost the initial desktop war to Gates.
But his philosophy arguably won the next war, the mobile revolution. The iPhone, the iPad, they are pure Jobsian thinking.
Exactly. And their clash, that fundamental tension, open versus closed, messy accessibility versus curated perfection, pragmatist versus visionary, it wasn't just history. It's the engine that drove the whole industry forward.
And it's a debate that's still incredibly relevant today, right? You see echoes of it everywhere. Android versus iOS, open source movements versus proprietary walled gardens.
Absolutely. The ripples are still spreading. Which brings us to maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to chew on.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about how they waged their battles. Jobs, with those intense, personal, sometimes volatile conflicts, like that shouting match with Scully. High emotion, high drama, driven by a quest for perfection, maybe at the expense of stability.
Versus Gates, the cool strategist, waging impersonal war through contracts, standards, market share, neutralizing opponents efficiently, methodically, building stability and scale, maybe sacrificing some aesthetic purity along the way.
So the question becomes, if you're building something truly lasting, a corporate legacy that needs to outlive its founder, which approach ultimately creates a more stable, enduring foundation?
Is it the passionate, uncompromising genius demanding perfection, or the calculating master of the ecosystem who prioritizes control and ubiquity?
How do those different approaches continue to shape the tech giants we interact with every single day? Something to think about.
A really powerful question to end on. This has been fascinating. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive for this look at the rivalry that truly shaped our digital world.